and he didn't need much. And he hit the tree and tried. What happens? I didn't know this. I talked to a medical examiner about what happens when you hang yourself, and you lose control of your arms and legs before you die. So you're capable of conscious thought, but you can't do anything. That's why people don't grab the rope and pull themselves up. You always wonder, that's why they can't. And so Tony was hanging there and had lost control of his arms and his legs, and he bit the tree. And he bit the tree so hard that one of his teeth came out into the tree. And that's the last thing he ever did, and then he died. And we were there not long after it happened, and it was disgusting. I mean, his hair was still on the ground under the tree. There was matter there, and there was a hole in the tree where the tooth was.
So were you down there writing that story before, like, were you working on the story before you knew he was going to kill himself?
We didn't know what had happened. We knew he'd been found. I talked to his wife, Laurie. Laurie thought he'd been murdered. Everyone thought he'd been murdered because nobody really knew about what turns out to be all these huge warning signs that he was slowly kind of coming unraveled. So they thought he'd been murdered, and weren't really satisfied with the job that the embassy staff was doing. So I said, look, I'm going to go down there. I need everything you've got. So his family, in the story, it sounds like you're in his head, and you are, because I have all of his email and his text messages. I mean, every single thing he wrote or said to someone during the several days leading up to him literally just running, you're way inside of his head, which was a little creepy because you could watch him sort of come unraveled before you. And so we just went and talked to every single human being who saw him, and the last 4 or 5 days is like, I think we can recreate everything but about an hour and a half of it. It was about an hour and a half. He was wandering the street somewhere, and I couldn't find anyone who we talked to. But other than an hour and a half, I can tell you every single thing he did the last 5 days of his life, and every single place he went, every single person he talked to, and what they said. Yeah.
Back to the death question. How do you approach the Harris family or the colleagues? How do you go about that?
I write people letters. With Tony's family, I called, who did I call? I called her priest, who said, this is what I'm trying to do, could you talk to her? With the Conleys, I wrote them a letter, and they were fantastic. I mean, the Conleys, there's this Marine, his name was Matthew Conley. He was killed in Iraq 2 weeks before his 20th birthday, I think, and maybe 22nd birthday, and about 2 weeks before the birth of his daughter, and he was about to come home. And he got, they were driving, to talk to you about, one little decision, they were driving to an intersection, and a car, they sort of got hung up, and he jumps out of the car to walk up and tell that person in the intersection to go, and the second he stepped out of the car, somebody had a cell phone and set off the thing, and blew him up. And it was a story we ran on the 5-year anniversary of the war in Iraq, because there's this disproportionate number of high school quarterbacks killed in Iraq, which is crazy. And so we wrote, I wrote a story about a quarterback who didn't come home, and Eric Needle, who works for us, wrote a story about one who came home without his throwing arm, and they both ran on the 5th year anniversary of the war. And it was sort of, they're all different sorts of theories, but this disproportionate number of high school quarterbacks from little bitty towns are getting killed in Iraq, much greater than the, so it was, so that's why I went to go do it, and I just hung out with his family. I wrote him a long letter, just basically saying, this is what I want to do, this is why. I just want to come hang out with you for a week. So I went to Green Hill, Alabama, and they were great. And I still talk to, them. I call Tommy and Debbie every single Memorial Day. So I think it's been 2 or 3 Memorial Days since then. So I just call them and say, hey, I'm thinking about you guys, how you doing? How's Catherine? Catherine is the daughter of Matthew, who we never saw. So I don't know, I try to keep in touch with him. Yeah.
This is a tough question for you to answer, but as big as ESPN is, it gets a ton of criticism. What do you do when you hear some of that, and how do you deal with your own misgivings about the bad side of ESPN versus the good side of ESPN?
I think if anything that big is going to get criticized, it's always interesting because, maybe I work for a totally different company, but the things you read versus my day-to-day interactions with the people who are running it, they're so different that, I've worked in enough media organizations to know that any sort of grand conspiracy theory is absurd because we're just trying to get the thing out the next day. We do a lot of stuff. there are, we'd all be lying. We said we were fans of all of it, but it's a gigantic company, and I do know that at a time when most people are cutting back, I'm driving around in cars in China and going to Brazil, and so I guess different strokes for different folks. You ask my friends who are SEC football fans, they want a lot less of Tony Harris and a lot more of fantasy picks about the SEC. So I think it's just sort of there's something there for everyone. And look, when you're that big and you're that successful, you're the thing to get people to take shots at. What else are you going to do? It's like an alternative weekly in a town. Their sole purpose in being is to take shots at the big city daily, no matter who's right. Yeah.
Last question.
Okay. Just a quick segue from that question. What's the future then of long-form sports journalism? Because you get to do it because ESPN is a very large company that's set aside a substantial budget to their credit to let you go and pursue projects like that, and you've obviously delivered because your work is tremendous. Maybe SI, does that occasionally, but even there, they're going to stuff like notes. Where does it kind of what's the future of it look like if you're the only one who's doing it?
Well, I just read the last issue of SI, and I thought there were a lot of really, I thought that, depending on your definition of long form, but there was a cover story on Mark Hurley that everyone already knew the news, and that was the quintessential magazine story. It took something that everybody thought they knew and told them an entire story of things they didn't know. There was a friend of mine, Mike Meyer, wrote a freelance piece about China in that issue. I don't. You sort of think that there was this grand old time of long-form sports journalism, and I just don't necessarily know that that's true. You go back and read Dan Jenkins' game stories from the golden age, and they're 1,000 words long. They're 1,100 words long, and there were always sort of the SI bonus. But I don't necessarily think that there is less long-form sports journalism than there was then. I think there's probably more. Then, it used to be there was Sports Illustrated, there was Sport, there was whatever was in Life magazine, and that was it. There was nothing in your daily newspaper at all. And, you covered the games and the teams, and that's it. So, I don't know. I think there's a very big future. There are a lot of, people who came to hear us sort of ramble about it, and there are people who do it very, very well. I'm not I don't think we're in decline on that. People read it. It's like people always ask me, long form stories on the internet, but when are you more likely to read a long story, like in the morning over breakfast or when you're in your cubicle pretending to work? I think that long form is a perfect place. Internet is a perfect place for long form because you have to do something while you're sitting there. So.